previous videos, we talked about some examples of various types of exam questions. So far, we have covered the theoretical questions, calculation questions, questions with graph and figures, as well as mathematical and statistical questions. Later, we're going to cover the multiple choice exam questions, as well as essay questions, which will be discussed in the following videos. The following are my recommendations. Of course, this will have to be governed by the practices of your programs, as decided by your head of program or the CQI committees. As a normal practice, the durations for the final exam papers is normally equivalent to the credit hours as assigned to that particular course. Let's say now the course is 3 credit hours. Normally we will have the final exam papers to be conducted in 3 hours. If the course has 2 credit hours, the durations for final exam is normally 2 hours. Second, it will be the marks assignment. Let's say now your papers is 3 hours paper. Your smallest intervals of the marks can be half a mark or 1 mark. Personally, I find half a mark is quite refined enough, and it is normally assigned when you only require short answers. The half a marks are normally given on basis of the keywords. If the marking scheme is in the mode of the sentences, you can have 1 mark as the smallest intervals. You will need to specifically identify where that particular marks is to be assigned to. Make it explicit to the markers in order to ensure the consistency in terms of the marking if it involves several markers in one papers. Let's say now your final exam papers is 2 hours. Normally half a mark it will be too refined. You can have the smallest interval to be 1 or 2 marks. Same principles. If the marks is assigned to the keywords, that means 1 mark would be the smallest interval. Now, if the answer is in the mode of sentences, you can have 2 marks as a unit. Now, why is the smallest intervals of the marks given differ by 2 types of papers? The main reason it will be the durations. If you use small intervals of the marks, there will be more questions required. Unless you are very certain that students can finish the entire paper on time, then you can go for smaller marks intervals. In fact, if you want to use half a mark for 2 hours paper, it is okay. Just that you have to be extra careful if the time allocated to the students is sufficient. You need to be fair to the students. Now, how do you know that? Whether sufficient time is given to the students? There are 2 ways to do it. First, you try to solve the exam questions by yourself. Time yourself how much time you require to solve the entire paper. While doing the paper, you will have to put yourself under the similar setting as the students. If the students are not allowed to have any references, you yourself, when you want to solve the exam questions, should not base on any references as well. Determine the durations that you spend in order to complete the entire paper, and then you multiply the time that you spend by 3. Let's say now you can complete the paper in 20 minutes. That means you will expect that the students can finish the papers by 3 times the durations that you spend, which will be 60 minutes. For a 2 hours paper, you will need to make sure you can complete the entire papers within 40 minutes. As for the 3 hours papers, you will have to complete the entire papers in 60 minutes. Now, why do you need to multiply 3 times? First, multiplying with 3 is an assumption, something that is for sure. The time spent for you to complete your final exam paper will be shorter than the students. Why is it so? Because you are the person setting the exam question. You will spend less time comprehending the questions. You have better ideas what are the scopes of assessment before you start doing the exam questions. Whereas, the students know nothing about the paper before they are sitting for the paper. They will require more time to understand the questions, plan how to answer the questions, as well as work out the solutions. Another reason that you're going to spend less time completing a final exam paper as compared to the students is that you have been teaching the course over the semesters. You understand better the principles and concepts related to the course. As compared to the students, most likely that would be the first semester the students undertaking the course. Definitely they are not as well versed as you. They have no idea what will be the main topics or the emphasis of the courses. Therefore, you need to allow the students spending more time than you completing the paper. That is the first method. If you observe the mechanism of the first method, it is pure assumption. We use a rule of thumb of the ratio of 1 to 3. It could be 1 to 2, 1 to 2.5, or maybe 1 to 4. There are so many factors governing it. Nevertheless, you can always start with a ratio of 1 to 3 and then proceed to the second method. The second methods are more towards the verifications, towards the durations that you give to the students, whether it is sufficient to the students based on the overall performance as well as your observations while conducting the final exam. You can observe from 2 perspectives. One is while you are conducting the final exam. You may not be the invigilator, but definitely you will know when your papers will be conducted and also where it is conducted. What you can do here is, if you really want to check and determine the suitable durations for your exam papers, let's say now your papers is 3 hours. You can pay a visit to the exam venue 2 hours after the exam started. You may observe the students, whether they have completed their papers or they are still struggling. If you see a majority of the students have completed your papers within 2 hours, that means the allocated durations may not be the same as what you have anticipated. In that case, probably you can have more questions so that they fully utilize the durations of final exam questions. And then later, after the exam has been completed, you can browse through the students' answer script in order to see whether a majority of the students can complete the papers on time. If you find a majority of the students cannot finish all the questions, then you will have to check whether it is due to insufficient durations given to the students to solve your final exam paper. Of course, another reason when a majority students cannot do all the questions, it could be really due to the questions are really difficult. Anyway, you have to consider from various perspectives in order to determine whether the time allocated for the final exam is sufficient. My personal experience, when I was a new lecturer, lacking of experience, there was once the papers was designed to be completed in 3 hours. However, within the first 1.5 hours, a majority of the students has already exceeded the exam venue. It is either the exam question is too easy or the durations given to the students is too much. And then when I mark their papers, a majority of them can score very well. Obviously, there is a misalignment in terms of the times given to the students versus the actual durations required by the students. That is the first problem. Of course, there was another problem. During then, I have limited knowledge about Bloom's taxonomy. I was not aware that a typical final exam papers shall include the questions of various levels: C1, C2, C3, C4, and C5, C6. As far as I could recall from that particular case, it was a theoretical course. That means the entire exam paper is all about theories. It was a 3 credit hour course. That's why the durations given should be 3 hours. I was not aware of the technique to set the questions with higher thinking orders. I thought that theoretical questions cannot go for higher thinking orders. Therefore, the entire paper, it will be C1, C2, and C3 cognitive level. Eventually, a 3 hours exam papers end up with most of the students managed to complete the papers within 1.5 hours. The paper become relatively easy if the students study through the notes, and there was lack of assessment towards higher thinking orders. Another misconception of mine when I first became a lecturer was that when I set the exam questions, higher standards means a thorough coverage of all the topics. I would like to assess as many topics and subtopics as possible within the paper. This is also not true. You can have a lot of questions in the paper, yet the entire paper can still be lower thinking orders. That means it can still be C1, C2, and C3. Regardless how many questions you put into your final exam paper, if it is only C1, C2, and C3, the papers is still relatively easy, as there are no assessment towards higher thinking orders. Not only that, this does not fulfill the requirements of the program, especially when you are dealing with a bachelor degree program requiring higher thinking orders as a part of the curriculum.